Well, for a while now, I've been wondering if it's possible to roller crimp buckwheat and get a good termination on it, get a good kill without using herbicide. So I know a lot of guys out there on YouTube elsewhere are doing the buckwheat roll down method on their food plots. And just about all of them, I think every one that I've seen out there, they soak it with glyphosate good after the fact. And I've just been wondering if there's a way where a guy could do this by roller crimping and just be able to avoid that amount of herbicide use if possible. So that's what I tried this year. That's what I'm going to show you guys the results of in this video. So I'm actually standing in my buckwheat cover crop part of my food plot right now, and it's been about two and a half weeks since I rolled this down with my DIY roller crimper. I made a video on that if you're interested in making one for about $100. Works very well. But as you can see behind me, all around me, this is what the buckwheat looks like after it's been roller crimped and laid down. I just pulled that roller crimper right behind my four-wheeler, and it did a really good job of laying this buckwheat down, kinking the plants. But what you're probably noticing is a lot of the heads of the buckwheat turned up towards the sky after I roller crimped and tried to set more flowers. So what I did was I waited until the late flowering stage and early pod set stage of this buckwheat when I rolled it down. I thought that was going to be the optimal time for me to get that rolled down. And, that's the point at which the plant was fully committed to the reproductive cycle of starting to set pods. So, in theory, when you roller crimp it down at that point, that's when you should get that effective kill on the plant. And, like I say, I was in that late flower, kind of early pod set stage. And even so, the heads of some of these plants came up. And then in some instances, even though the plant was kinked, it sent up almost a new lateral off the side of the plant, which was really interesting. So that was one of the drawbacks that I noticed right away of this method of roller crimping this buckwheat down without using herbicide, was that it didn't get that good, hard, clean kill on the buckwheat that I was hoping for. But nonetheless, I did want to show you guys some of the results of, my fall food plot is starting to come up through here, my fall crop. In this particular plot, I put in, it's called Rackham Radish. It's a great brassica blend. I really like it. And I just want to show you guys here that there are a number of these radish and turnip plants starting to come up through this buckwheat, which is pretty cool. I was a little bit discouraged at first, to be totally honest, but you need to give it a little bit of time for your fall crop to make its way up through this buckwheat. Now, the other interesting thing is a lot of these buckwheat plants are completely dead. If you look at these, I mean, these are crackly dry. It did what it was supposed to on a lot of these plants. The amazing part is, even though these plants are kinked and a lot of them are dead, a lot of them sent these branches up just like this that turned upwards and are now flowering, which is kind of crazy. And some of these flowers are actually starting to set pods again. So I am going to get a little bit of volunteer buckwheat coming up in here. A lot of these plants that are flowering and then seeding out are going to result in viable seeds. As an example, there's going to be some viable seeds on here. Overall, I'm a little bit bummed out with how this turned out. I was hoping to get a better kill on this, but all hope is not lost. These are some of the brassica plants coming up that, really, they look great. The plants that are in here look fantastic. There's a little bit of grass, a little bit of weed competition, but I think as long as these brassica plants can push through this and make it through, the next couple weeks here, and these buckwheat plants eventually lay down and die, this could still be a pretty darn good plot. One that, is resistant to erosion. We just had a big rain here the other day, and, one that will hold that soil moisture in better because of the thatch layer on top of the ground. All right, so now let's go over here and take a look at the area where I roller crimped it down and then I disked it in. So I wanted to try both methods just to see which one was going to work better. And this right here behind me is what it looked like after roller crimping the buckwheat down and then just disking over it. So you can see a really nice thatch layer on here. It just looks like I took a straw bale and shook it out on this, which is really cool. This is what I was hoping it would look like. So again, this is what it looks like when you roll it down, then disc it in, and you can see that the buckwheat is completely terminated in this case. And you know, this right here behind me is, in my mind, a really viable way if you're trying to avoid herbicide use, but you're also trying to build organic matter in your soil. You're trying to bring that OM content up in your topsoil layer, in your top 6 inches. And the other really cool thing about having this buckwheat as a cover crop that I really enjoyed was it did have a smothering effect on weeds. So this summer, you know, it was an entirely closed canopy of buckwheat out here, and I mean very tight. And I seeded it a little bit heavier than what they recommend. I ended up doing about 80 pounds per acre of buckwheat, which is probably double or almost double what, you know, conventional wisdom would tell you online if you just research buckwheat cover crops. But I got sandy soil here, it's pretty dry, and I wanted that smothering effect, and it really worked well. I was impressed. You know, I have a ton of weeds right here, just like all you out there do, and this buckwheat, it was amazing how once that canopy closed, it didn't allow any of the other grasses, any of the creeping type weeds, water hemp, you name it. I didn't see much of any out here. I see now there's some grass starting to come back in out here, and a couple of weeds are starting to fill back in, but you know, it's late summer now, and a lot of those weeds aren't going to be nearly as vigorous as they would be, you know, at the start of the summer or the middle part of the summer. So final takeaways on the buckwheat roll down here, how this went. I'm a little bit bummed out with the results, to be totally honest. I was hoping that by roller crimping this buckwheat, I would have gotten a little bit better termination, a little bit better kill on it. But you don't know until you try. You know, there's a couple things that I would recommend if you guys are curious about this method or thinking about trying it next year. The first is I would maybe wait until that plant is a little bit more mature. You know, again, I terminated, I roller crimped when it was in late flower, kind of early pod set. I would maybe wait until later pod set when they have more seeds showing. Of course, you know, that might have resulted in more of these plants dying had I waited a little longer. Of course, the risk you run the longer you wait is that, you know, at some point those seeds are going to become viable. And if you wait too long, you're going to end up with a whole crop full of volunteer buckwheat coming up. But seeing what happened in my plot here with a lot of these plants turning upwards and trying to reseed out, I'm going to end up with volunteer buckwheat in here anyways now. So that risk came to pass anyways. You know, even by terminating it earlier, that didn't save me from the volunteer buckwheat. So that's one thing I would do. I would terminate a little bit later. The other thing I would do is just looking again where these four-wheeler tracks are. I can see that my four-wheeler tires killed these plants in the paths where I drove it. I would think about next year, if I do this again, roller crimping it twice. That may kill these plants better. And then trying to move my wheeler tires over so I'm running over the plants and just damaging the plants more effectively over the whole plot. That's the kind of the second thing I would do differently if I were to try this again next year. The third thing is, you know, I think this is an option if you're trying to reduce the amount of tillage in your plot, which is also one thing that I'm going for here. But there's a balance there, right? Where if this tends to grass in, or there's too many weeds, or you know, there's too much volunteer buckwheat coming up, if these brassicas don't come up well enough, then this won't be a viable method for me. I'm kind of teetering right on the edge right now of if I think this is going to work or not. If you can tolerate some weeds, if you can tolerate some volunteer buckwheat, and you want to reduce the amount of tilling in your food plot, I think this is a cool method, and no herbicide use. Very cool method. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're not okay with the amount of weeds that's in here, you're not okay with these buckwheat heads trying to pop back up, you know, then you probably want to look more at the roll it down, let it dry up a little bit, and then just disc it in method. That gives you a way cleaner plot It's still adding that organic matter, that green manure as people call it, back into the topsoil. So you're still realizing that benefit there of that organic matter going back in. And you're still realizing the benefit of, you know, that summertime closed canopy smother crop effect of the buckwheat. The only thing with the disking method over there is you are disturbing the soil one more pass in the summer. So it's all trade-offs, you guys. That's what I look at on my food plot is, you know, I could have ran over this with glyphosate and it would have killed this buckwheat the day I planted. But, you know, trying to minimize or eliminate the use of herbicide, it all comes down to trade-offs. So I hope some of you out there found this video interesting or helpful. I just like experimenting with stuff like this. I'm not calling this a success necessarily, but I'm also not calling it a failure either. I mean, I see a lot of viable, good brassica plants coming in here, and I will have a food plot in here come fall. Hope you guys liked the video. Stick around for the next one, and I will see you then.